Dr. Sophie Messager, and this is the Wisdom Messenger podcast. In this show, I interview pioneers in women's health and personal development about groundbreaking concepts that help women reclaim lost knowledge and restore inner wisdom. By bridging insights from ancient traditions and modern research, we question stale cultural narratives and midwife a new paradigm around birth, life transitions, and women's autonomy. Join me as we delve into stories and studies that empower women to reconnect with their inner voice and live their truth. Tune in as we rediscover what it means to fully trust ourselves and shape our collective future. In this episode, I interview Aimee Hamblyn. Aimee is a doula trainer and energy lift healer who is fascinated by how bringing the body into deep peace facilitates healing. We discuss how we can reclaim our power and sovereignty on the spiritual and healing path. So welcome to this episode of the Wisdom Messenger, and today I'm delighted to welcome Aimee Hamblyn, and we're going to be talking about reclaiming your power and sovereignty as a healer. And Aimee is a doula trainer and healer. And I was wondering, Aimee, if you might start by telling us a bit more extensive version about yourself, what you do, and how you got into the whole healing world.
Thank you, Sophie. It's so good to connect with you and your audience. So that's a great start. So how did I get into healing? Well, I was really blessed in that I incarnated into parents who probably were kind of into healing already in their own way. So I think my mum is a psychotherapist. So kind of very much from that Western model of mind, but she started her training when I was a child. So I very much grew up in an environment which was very much around the sort of life of self-examination. And that was very nourishing for me in my teens and 20s. And then also, and that's kind of another strand, my dad, I think, was always interested in different kinds of religions, or kind of, he was a bit of a spiritual seeker. And I think when my mum was pregnant with me, my dad was having a little brief time, or I'm not sure how long it lasted, where he was exploring Sufism. And so the reason why I'm called Aimee is actually because of the teacher that he was working with at that time gave him the recommendation or the teaching that my name should begin with A. That was so there was something in the family constellation that I kind of landed in that I think was good groundwork for this path that I've found myself on. And I was the only one of my siblings that went to Catholic school. So neither of my parents were Catholic, but I think there was something in me that really wanted to have an immersion in a spiritual context in my teenage years. And although part of my kind of teenage kind of coming of age was very much around what I didn't like about the dogma of Christianity or the dogma of many religions, under what we might call the patriarchy, there was still, I think, a part of me that was very nourished to be in that environment. And then in my 20s, I found, so I had counseling, sort of therapy in my 20s, but I remember going to university and I had my first yoga class. And so this opens the door into what we might think of as like the Eastern spiritual path, the Eastern philosophies, a different way of kind of connecting to the divine and through the body, really, yoga through the body as a way of connecting to that kind of spiritual essence in an embodied way. And it was such a powerful experience for me. And I guess in my 20s, I dibble dabbled a lot. you know, like I would go to a Buddhist meditation group, you know, sometimes I'd go clubbing at the weekend and kind of get high that way, you know. So it was a very, I guess, typical kind of 20s experience. And I went in just before my dad died in 2004. I went to India and had a incredibly powerful experience just being in that country and kind of um, going to different temples and understand it now to be an awakened experience, but actually I had no context for that. So
Mm.
my experience of it was I was crying a lot, like all the time, but like this joyful, there was the kind of like 5 days. I went to a temple and I felt my heart kind of just like expand beyond anything I'd experienced. I felt this immense joy and kind of sense of unity with the land, with the earth, with all the other people. And it lasted for about 5 days, and it was really like kind of blew my mind, really. Um, my dad died the later that year, and again, that was another really informative experience for me because I really saw, you know, I was blessed to be present with him when he passed, and it was clear to me that his something there was some part that was there in the body, and then it wasn't there, but it in the body, but it went somewhere else. And so it was a very clear indication, okay, yes, we are more than the body. The body is in itself holy. The body in and itself is, um, you know, divine in its form, nature. And there's this other part that is transcendent and um, kind of ever present, really. And that kind of really clarified a lot for me. Roll forward another few years, I became a mum, had my birth of my daughter, which I would say was a pretty traumatic experience, very medicalized, but also very powerful, very spiritual, brought a lot of healing with it. Um, and after that, I guess that's when a few things came together. I started to do my doula training. I started supporting other people. I trained as a holistic massage practitioner, very you know, really supporting people with that mind-body connection. And then as I started to work in this modality, I realized I could see energy. I was like, oh, I can see this thing sometimes happening with some clients, not always. What is it? Like how do I consciously I know there is this dimension, but I don't have the tools really to engage with it in a conscious way, but I want to. And so I kind of put the intention out to the universe, you know, I want to teach you for this.
Can I ask you a bit more to clarify? Do you see it with your actual physical eyes?
At that time, yes, that's what I was seeing. It wasn't an inner plane experience. It was, I would have the client on the bed. I would say I was at the head end, and I would look down at the feet and I could see all this light around the feet, or, you know, maybe I'm working on the feet and I see it around the head with my eyes open. Um, and it was definitely like a visual thing at that point. And I would say my clairvoyant or my clairs have changed throughout my studies and time of practicing. But it was very, you know, it wasn't my imagination. You
Yeah,
know, it
yeah, no, I
wasn't
get
like
it.
something.
But the reason why I'm asking is because I'm always fascinated, you know, that each healer has their own different skills. So mine is entirely kinesthetic. So I spent years
Mm,
trying to see, and then I realized one day this is not my gift. Do you see what I mean? But
yes, yes, yes,
I always feel fascinated by people who have visual healing because you know
yes.
when it's something that doesn't come naturally to you, it's like Wow, I wonder what that feels like. I'd fancy
Yeah,
like
yeah,
going inside your body to get an experience of, like
right.
I like, well, that must be really cool. So yeah.
Yeah, like it was, and as I was saying that sometimes I don't see anymore. So I think it's evolved and changed, and sometimes one part of my Claire experiences will turn up and another one will turn down.
Mhm.
Um, that's been my experience so far. Um, yeah, so that was the kind of call out for, okay, so I know there's a soul dimension. I have this, and I've experienced what I would call a kind of awakening into the divine um, reality that kind of exists. And I know there's this energy dimension as well. And but our culture doesn't teach us about that. So how do I want to explore this more? So I kind of prayed or, put my intention out, please, I want to teach it. And in 2013, I met my teacher who I've studied with ever since. And her name's Shakti Durga, and her primary kind of modality of teaching is called Ignite Your Spirit Therapy, which is what I currently primarily use with my
Mhm.
clients. And just to say a little bit about that, but I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about it in depth, is so yes, I think she helps her students to discover what are their intuitive languages, and it can be different for everyone and it can change over time. And so she helps either as the reciprocant of the healing or as the practitioner of the healing, that really you're tuning in to these other, the physical body, our mind and emotions, the soul, the energetic part of us, our own soul and our own kind of higher guidance, and then also this connection into that kind of universal quality of love that
Mm.
is kind of what I would consider to be the underpinning of the universe and all of creation. So that's what she's helping her students with. That's what her healing modality helps us with. And then I guess a bit more in practical terms, what that looks like is maybe I work with a client either one-to-one or in a group, and we would do like a kind of almost like a meditative process together where I, as a facilitator, would kind of help to tune in to what the energy body is saying in that moment, either of the group or of the individual. And then through a process of using the breath, using an intention, visualization, imagination, um, and also using release commands, so using the voice, to move energy, so to kind of clean and clear the energy body, the chakras, and then to bring in more of this kind of unconditionally loving energy to kind of fill us back up. And that the result of that being that as we because I guess my understanding is that our energy body and our chakras are kind of like our interface with the rest of reality.
Mm.
And so when we make changes into our energy, we make changes in our lived experience.
Mm.
That's my experience personally, and also the work I do with clients. So that's my kind of, in a nutshell,
Yeah,
healer story.
it's lovely.
I I hope that is good,
Yeah.
and it lands well.
Yes. So I think stories are important. Just talking, I've done this training, I've done this training is not as powerful as telling what led you there and how, if you see what I mean.
Mm,
And so, I know you talk about bringing, what is hidden into the light of our consciousness and through shadow work. And I just wonder if you could tell us more about what's effective shadow work and
mm.
how someone who is new to this might be able to get started.
Yeah, wow. We're going straight in, right, with the big questions. I love
I
it.
don't like to faff around going like, let's go lightly into this topic.
Yeah, no, it's great.
So one of the things I
So,
want to just say before we get more into that is that, and I think it's important to demystify it, but I know that as a culture, we tend to, as a Western culture, we tend to only want to see the good in people,
yes.
in the sense that running away from the bad, and I do quotation marks with my fingers,
Yeah.
because it's like, in our culture, your culture only wants to see us when we are smiley and pleasant and shiny, and that is permeates in everything. And so there's so much of like boring, like in parenting, we see it in the birth, we see it in parenting, education, this idea that you don't want to see the child when they're having a tantrum, or do you see that, that's so pervasive.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
this generation is doing a better job on average, but I think that the generation we come
There's still
from,
more work.
it was
Yeah.
so pushed down, like that
Yeah.
basically when you're being unpleasant as a child, I want you to go away, like literally go to your
Yes.
room kind of stuff.
Yes.
So burying the emotions inside means that there's a lot of us walking around having integrated this idea that I'm only lovable if I'm being,
If I'm good.
yeah,
The good girl.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I totally see that, and I'm 100% with you. And yeah, the good girl or the good boy kind of burden in a way is a really, I think it's really like a big theme in our culture, as you say, and it kind of links to perfectionism, right? And I think it also links to um we could look back in our collective European history, say, and a lot, I think, of this comes from the model that God is up here and we are down here, and we have to strive to kind of get to God. And it's very much this and there's a lot of there's a lot of teaching around we're inherently sinful, right?
yeah. God, don't
And
even
this
get me started on that. I was brought up as a Catholic, so like
yeah,
you, I rejected all that in my teens. Yeah, I, every time I get a chance to be immersed in that, because I go to a wedding or a christening or something, I'm like, oh God, it's not moved on.
yeah,
All is still
it can
this
feel
like finger waving God. How
yeah.
am I supposed to be full of goodness if we are constantly being told? It's basically a culture that's trying to make you improve by telling you what you're doing wrong.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
And we see that like with our own inner self-critic, our own inner voice of self-criticism, and a lot of the way like we may have been parented in terms of like it's driven from a kind of anxiety. I see it even when these patterns pop up in the way I parent myself. It is coming from essentially like an anxiety or a fear of not being received, not being accepted, not being safe, and therefore we need to like um prune ourselves into
mm,
being a kind of acceptable shape to be loved and valued. And I guess the then it may have been that for some parts of our collective consciousness and evolution that was useful. I mean, have you heard this expression? It's kind of blew my mind the first time I heard it. My Shakti Daga said it to a group of us that um, evil is the good we outgrew, which I think is like mind blowing, right? So
evil
if
is a
our,
good we outgrew. So tell me more, because I'm not sure I fully understand what that
and I
means.
think this is like a really powerful thing with the shadow, right? So if in our experience of life, everything in creation, I'm going to use that word, but maybe everything in life has there's nothing inherently good or inherently evil outright. Everything can be useful. Everything can be useful in the right time, in the right proportion, in the right place. For example, anger. Out of control can be violent, destructive, oppressive, etc. In the right amount at the right time, it's an incredible force for personal boundaries and safety, etc. So so going back to this shadow, like shadow, good and what is good, what is bad. Well, from a place of understanding that as a human, as an individual, I'm on an evolutionary journey of consciousness myself. And as a collective, humans have been and are. And so it may have been that in some point in our European history that being told off for doing something wrong might have, being told you're going to go to hell if you steal.
Yeah.
Maybe at some point in human history that was a useful teaching. But for many of us now, that is not a useful teaching. We've outgrown that.
Yeah.
We don't need to be told don't steal or don't, because actually our consciousness is at a level where we don't want to do that, right? For most people, I'm not saying for everyone in the world, right? But probably for most of the people listening to this podcast, that's probably where they are, right? So, and in my own personal life, I can look back at ways that I acted unconsciously in the past that now I can think that was not skillful. That was it, but it was the best that I could do in that moment, at that time, right? And so the remedy for that, for me, the healing for that has always been, how do I love that? How do I bring love into that situation, or in the current time, into my current situation, my current experience? How can I love that part of me, that is acting in an unconscious way, or coming from fear, or coming from pain, coming from, could be for me a fear of not being loved, abandoned, and not accepted. How do I bring love into that part, which I would call bringing it into consciousness, bringing it into light, bringing it into being held, which is essentially shadow work.
Yeah.
Hold that in my own heart of my own being. And then through that love, I can kind of go forward, which is very different, right, to what and we can do that with our children, right?
The idea that just popped into my head is I have a friend who was a monk in India for 3 years, and we often have very deep conversation about spirituality, and we both share this kind of, we joke about it saying, be enlightened now, beating yourself up through enlightenment,
right?
and this kind of judgment that comes thinking I should be ahead, I should be further, and the work is indeed one of self-kindness. The work is one of self-acceptance of your journey and what's happening now, and that you're exactly where you should be, and treating that growth, and not like, as you say, when you look at your past and you think, oh, I was not very enlightened then, but the judging that as well is not part of the thing. You can't just like some people said, oh, I used to be an asshole. It's not very so yeah, I'm completely on board with what you're talking about, holding with kindness and love the process that you're trying to grow, rather than there can be so much judgment there, in every level, not just the spiritual, but like the I should be, and anything that's like I should be more like this, more like that, I should be having all my shit sorted out, and
and I think a lot of, with the work that I do with parents, kind of beyond the birth period or the postnatal period, often I'm meeting these people when their children are kind of 3 years old onwards, is they're part of when that we're often meeting shadow parts of ourselves in relationship to our own children, because that's often where we received the wounding of that. Well, if you're going to cry about that, go and
Yeah, yeah.
cry in the other room, or if you're angry about that. And so I'm fine with my, this is my own personal experience and the work I help some parents with as well, is how do we with the shoulds, as a parent, I shouldn't lose my temper with my child.
Yeah.
I shouldn't, I should, why am I losing my shit? I should be able to be calm. I should be able
Like
to
this
be.
idea, what I call the Madonna mother. When I became a mother, I very quickly noticed, and noticed as I still have some remnants of that, although it's much better. But this idea of the ideal mother who never loses her shit, is always kind of compassionate. Like that doesn't, like, who does that? Like, just
Right.
doesn't exist. But this image is so strong, right? I think
Yes.
again the product of a lot of patriarchy, because what's seen as the ideal mother or the ideal woman is usually somebody who's completely self-effacing, self-giving, always in a nurturing role, always perfect. Again, perfectionism, and
Right.
bring, as you say, bringing that into consciousness. I think, like, I completely agree with you. I think children come and they are gurus,
They
and
go,
they come and in the place that hurts
yeah.
the most. I don't know if you've read The Conscious Parent by Dr.
Mm,
Sherry. Oh, I can't remember how to pronounce her
I don't
name.
know that I think I should.
But
Sounds good. Title.
the book is full of stories of, just to give one example, it says, alpha parent get a child who's got learning disabilities.
Mm,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah. And
Yes.
it's full of
Perfect
stories
teachers
like
for
that.
us.
And I listened to this book a few years ago, and I've re-listened to it through, some of the challenge
Mm,
I've been going through my children myself. And it's really
mm.
fascinating, because I really think the biggest teachers are kids.
So, yes,
Yeah, and you
I
can either go with the
agree.
growth, or you can go with what I see sadly a lot of parents do, which is resort to the do as you're told, and beyond that, I've also got the theory that the toddlerhood and the terrible twos, God, I hate that expression, and the same way our culture describe teenagers are being, I
Yeah.
think it's just a product of a culture that just wants kids to be obedient, and of course,
Yes.
then they either fall into the category of doing what they're told, which causes probably more harm, than the other category falls into the rebellion. And I've seen
Mm,
most of that. I see so much of that in
yes.
extreme parenting in, both the UK and France, and actually it's worse in France. Um,
Mm.
I'm flabbergasted, because it's like treating kids like the enemy.
Yes, very sad, very sad. And I think, yeah, for me at least, it's like when I'm noticing my ch ch child, my daughter, like is, poking me in a sore part, you know, I'm having some kind of reaction, is the time really to go in and really kind of, there's often I find that around that thing with the should and the guilt, underneath that is often a shame. And then underneath that is often an experience that we had when we were that child, or we displayed that kind of behavior, or we felt that kind of thing. And there's a kind of parcel of energy there that once we, in a therapeutic setting, we can love that, like work in bringing that some kind of healing balm and allow that energy to move again. It really starts freeing up the person to, be more spacious with their
Yeah,
child, for example. This is what I found, but it's definitely it's not the healing journey is definitely not sometimes you make big leaps
yeah,
and it's like, wow. A lot of the time it's like repetition and a lot of practice of self-care and daily kind of coming back to self. And a lot of times it can feel like you're going backwards, but
And I think
I
with
mean,
that, one of the myths I'm also very aware of is that I know I had that, and I still have some of it in some level, and I see that in other people. If I find the right healing modality, I'll become enlightened, and I never have any problems anymore.
right, yeah,
Yeah, in
yes,
like I'll
yes,
become
yes.
always happy, never have, and again, it's also with that the idea of handing over that to someone else, to another system. Do you see what I mean? Like, if I find the right modality, all my shit will be
Or
fixed.
teacher or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
or thing
And
outside of myself.
yeah,
Yeah.
and the expectations with that, people go to um, healings or trainings with when anyone goes to that thing with that kind of expectation, then
Mm.
it's usually a very big disappointment. And
Yes.
because as you said, big leaps are usually it's more like tiny little repetition for years, and then only 6 years later you can see, oh yeah, it's actually gone
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And I suppose with that thing of if we're in a body, if we've incarnated, then life will bring us things to challenge us, right? And I guess we can think about it as or is kind of like empowerment weight training, if you like,
Yeah,
so like rather than like I thought I dealt with this. I thought
I
why is this happening to me? I thought that I had like
it's doing this spiraling, and you're
yeah,
like, oh god, I thought that here
yeah.
it comes
I
again.
sorted that one out. What's going on?
Yeah,
Yeah, that we can and I think this is linked to the shadow work thing or the it's again it's like how do I use this experience? How do I use how can I rather than feel victimized by this experience or this person or what's happening to me, how do I how do I use it for um my own kind of, if you like, spiritual weightlifting or my own empowerment weightlifting, or how do I take this experience and bring my kind of most loving self into this experience
yeah,
and get the most juice out of it.
yeah,
um it doesn't, I think we can all have little moments of like poor me and why is this happening,
yeah,
and some experiences definitely involve a longer period of time of like sitting in the grief of something.
yeah,
And but I think that thing that we were talking about earlier before we started recording of um like our personal power, and this flip of, it's a bit like, I guess you could think about it in terms of, from a psychological point of view. I was talking to another client and colleague who is a psychotherapist, and we're talking about the individuation process from, as a baby and toddler, we kind of are separating from the parent.
yeah,
We no longer see ourselves as, one with the parent and mother. And life takes us on this kind of individuating journey, and sometimes when there's been an interruption in that, or there's been a rupture that's been difficult and has been unhealed, we can hold this part of self that is the kind of that wounded bit of child, who then is constantly looking, this part of self constantly looking for the teacher, or in a birth context, the obstetrician or even the doula, who is going to kind of save us.
mm,
And so, in terms of like healing as being part of how we reclaim our power, I think it's often about going back into like really scooping up that inner child part of self that was maybe 2 or maybe
yeah,
7 or maybe, and kind of saying, oh, okay, I've got you now. And in this current situation where I'm feeling disempowered or victimized or poor me, how when I hold you, when I anchor more of this divine love and presence into my being and body, how do we move forward together?
Mm.
That I think that's kind of the the practical application in a way of
What you're
how
talking
how
about
that
is an
works.
integration
Yes,
other than a rejection of the parts. What I'm hearing you say
right.
is just almost like reclaiming bits
Yes,
of yourself that got like stuck, rejected, harmed, and not like, because like what you were describing with, when kids push our buttons, telling yourself, well, I shouldn't get angry, it's never addressing what's actually causing the button pressing. And it's really quite fascinating what comes out of our mouths when we start, especially rearing small children. And I was thinking it's also made harder by the fact that we live in a nuclear family society.
yeah, that's right. Because I loved what you were saying before about the importance of community with this. Um, and the difference, I guess, between having loving, supporting community. There's something about the difference between that and like giving our power away to an authority. Um, and
It doesn't mean that you're doing it alone, because here's a flip side of that, because we know that empowerment lies in your own growth and your own ability to do things for yourself and not somebody else. But it's the other far angle of that is the independent at all cost, that is the result of a trauma response. This never relying on
yes,
anyone, is
yes,
the
that's right.
not ever wanting to feel bad feelings, is the basically unable to feel emotions, but also being really distant. And as
Yeah.
I was saying, there was always, because often when you discuss these things with people, they go, oh, you mean you should never do that, or you should. And it's not like that, because it could easily be interpreted, oh, it comes inside of you, you should be always doing it on your own. I don't think we can heal on our own.
No.
I think we need somebody else to help hold the space for that healing. But the healing happens inside. The healing doesn't happen. The
Yes.
story I told my kids when they were little, because I thought, oh my God, I integrated this idea, was, when you grazed your knee the other day, who made the scab? The doctor? And so
Yeah.
but the doctor provided some space that, allowed to
Yes.
safe, and the bandage, it's like the bandage is not doing or the plaster is not doing the healing.
Yes, your body is,
Yeah, but
and
to feel safe, you need to be held by community, and to grow, you need to be held by community. And
yes.
again, another very clear thing in our culture is a lack of that, a lack of belonging to that is not normal, especially in big cities. When I lived in Paris, I remember thinking, wow, it's the loneliest I've ever felt, was living in a big city where nobody knew anybody. You didn't know your
Mm,
neighbors. The biggest the place, the bigger the city, the least people tend to know each other. Although I see a movement towards reclaiming that's happening. It's
mm,
quite a few years. But yeah, it's the power of healing for me. It's more powerful in community.
yeah.
Leading a healing in a community space is more powerful than leading a healing just yourself one to one with.
Mm,
Although they both have their space, but I'd
mm,
like to
mm,
go. Talking about you. I know you mentioned this vibration scale by David Hawkins, and can you
mm.
tell us more about that and how we can become more aware of it and shift that? And can you describe the scale? Because it's not something I'd kind of heard about people mentioning similar things, but I didn't know who was the
The
I don't like to
originator
say
of it.
inventor, because I'm sure there's lots of other people who've talked about scales like
Sure.
that. But can you
Yeah.
describe it first?
Yeah, so it's I from what I understand, he did some experiments. I'm always I wonder, from a scientific methodology point of view, like how how these experiments would be considered within they may be picked apart slightly within a kind of scientific methodology, but he used kinesiology,
Yeah.
like muscle testing, and he gave kind of number ratings for these different states of being, which shame, I think, is one of the lowest. Anger is higher on the scale. There's a bit more action. You can kind of see there's a bit more, and right at the top, you've got states of bliss, unity, um, and then kind of, I guess, you've got kind of love in the middle, peace, kind of a little, around this kind of area. And he said in his book that that most of humanity is living at this quite a low vibration at the
Yeah.
moment, at the vibration of like shame and blame,
Yeah.
which is a very kind of victim consciousness level of vibration. And of course, as people, we're moving up and down this vibrational scale
All the time.
all the time. So it's more to do with what's your general resting vibration
Yeah.
doing?
I like that.
What's your
And I
overall
also want to
average?
say, immediately what springs to mind is, keep your vibration high, brigade.
Yes.
And when we are
Yeah,
talking
yeah, it's a
about
bit like,
shadow work, I'm like, like allergic to
yeah,
that because it's gaslighting yourself. Um,
right.
and when you're neurodivergent, so this year I got diagnosed with ADHD, and one of the things I've become really aware of is that my emotion scale is huge. So the joy I feel very high,
Yeah.
and the not good emotion I also feel very low. Like my husband, who is not diagnosed, but I now know is autistic. His emotion is more like, well, there's a
Yeah.
little bit of things, but it's a lot more constrained.
Yes.
And I was saying to my therapist, I wouldn't swap mine for
Yes.
his, because I don't
Yes.
like the lows, but I love the fact that when I get excited about
Yeah.
something, when I get joyful about something, it's really, really big. But yeah,
Yes. The capacity's
I
there.
think it's very important to say that if we're aiming at, I like what you said about aiming at a resting place.
Yeah, an average. It's like would be like an
It's
overall
not like you're
average
trying to pretend you're going to be up there all the time.
in bliss all the time.
Yeah.
No. And I
And beat
think what I
yourself up
love,
when you're not.
yeah, yeah. I'm such a bad person. No, I exactly. And then what I really loved was, so I found out about this through my Shakti Durga teaches it in one of her courses, and that's how I found out about it a few years back. And more recently, a couple of years ago, I started doing some work really with a psychotherapist called Miranda Fairhall, who does a beautiful container called A Tune for Connection, which is really to help parents with trauma. And she introduced me to polyvagal theory, and there's a beautiful marriage there between the hierarchy that is talked about in polyvagal theory, and the vibrational scale. And I think they work, it's a lovely kind of combination of way of kind of understanding, because for me at least, it's helped me not do what you're talking about, which is like, oh, I should always be at least at peace, or at least,
Yeah. I
and
should.
like,
Yeah.
exactly, that's this thing. So when I've kind of integrated it a bit with this nervous system understanding, that with our nervous systems, it's not that we're really getting embodied and really understanding that, yes, my nervous system is going to, because it's my human part of self, it's my survival part of self, it's a really important part of self, and it's always scanning the environment for threat.
Mm.
If I have trauma, there's maybe some wiring in that maybe is going to see things as threatening, that were threatening when I was 5, but actually now I'm 47. I'm completely differently resourced, and therefore it's not threatening. So this is where the healing comes in. But to go back to the vibrational scale and the nervous system, polyvagal theory, we have a state of what the dorsal vagal state, which would be in a healthy way, is when you're feeling like it's kind of quite, you're coming right down on the ladder of states of being. It can be quite, it's what helps us to kind of fall asleep
Yeah.
or rest. It also, if it's in a more survival state, it is in that collapse or freeze state,
Yeah.
which is appropriate sometimes. That is an
Yeah.
appropriate survival response in some situations. Then we come up the ladder into the parasympathetic, which is the fight or flight
Yeah.
state. And we have to, on a daily basis, if we've collapsed into freeze, if something, procrastination, for example, is a, I noticed myself doing it yesterday. I was a bit nervous about something. I noticed I'm like, kind of sitting there like doing scrolling or not
Yeah.
doing the thing, oh, okay, I've gone into a bit of a shutdown. I need to bring myself up on the ladder into a quite active state,
Yeah.
which is more like this, like foot on the accelerator
Yeah.
in a healthy way that's going to help me to like write the email that I
Yeah.
need to write. If it's in a more survival state, it's going to let me run away, or
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
going to cause me to be like, say no, or,
Yeah.
you know, act in that way. And then above that, we've got the ventral vagal state, which is the where we're open to connection, where we
Mm.
feel safe, where we're in that kind of socially available state. And all of that's happening on a biological level, and all of that's happening every day, all the time as we move up and down.
Yeah.
And through our healing work, that could be, many different ways we might go about that, whatever kind of suits us. We're just getting better, if you at moving up and down, and we're healing the traumas that may have caused us to um, be super reactive in a
Yeah.
situation which perhaps doesn't need we don't need to be shouting at the man on the road
Yeah.
who's just cut in front of us, or we don't need to be shouting at our child because they're not putting their wellies on quick enough. This is where the healing part happens. Or a situation which in the past it might have been appropriate for us to kind of go into collapse. Now, through doing healing work, we don't need to stay in that kind of collapsed state, but it's
Yeah.
all about kind of building capacity in the nervous system to
So,
to have those movements.
yeah, I mean, I think here the key, because it ties onto what we were talking about, the key is noticing.
Yes.
Because I think most people, I like traffic light system, notice you're in
Mm,
amber before you're going to red, so you can re-regulate. I think the key is re-regulation always. But I'm curious about the key is noticing the dysregulation, so you can do something about it before
yeah.
it runs away with you. But I'm just curious about your approach in your work. Do you go from the energetic angle into the, like, do you start from the energy into the nervous system, or
Well,
do you
good
start
question.
into the really nervous system and then, because chicken and egg situation here, and they
Right?
both, for me, it's not either or, they're both integrated with each
Yes.
other and both affect.
No, agree.
Like you throw a dart on the dartboard, if you hit something that's going to soothe the nervous system, I believe it's going to affect the energetic system and vice versa.
Correct. Yeah, 100% agree. And I think it really depends on the client, and it really depends on what's happening in that session, and even like what is appropriate language to use. So a session with a client, it could it is, I don't know, I'm trying to use your dartboard uh
Analogy.
now I'm like, is it different darts? I'm not sure. Or
Yeah, yeah.
just we're trying to hit there. So so a bit, I want to answer that a bit more clearly. There are tools and techniques that I've used myself from a nervous system point of view around becoming more embodied and more noticing. For example, one that I find really useful is just orienting safety in a room, and it's just a simple thing of like looking around a room, and noticing right now, actually, I'm safe. If my mind's spinning out about something, actually, like in this moment, I'm safe right now. That can be a useful thing to do with clients as well. For example, before we go into maybe a experience in the past that may bring some dysregulation. So I'm always with the clients helping to create that safe container so that we can kind of bring into the light of consciousness and love whatever needs to kind of be looked at. And sometimes it will be more through the energetic tool, and sometimes it's just a mixture of both at the same time. It really kind of depends. But yeah, for me, they are super, like they almost just sit on top of each other as models.
And I also wanted to ask you, because you talked, in the discussion we had prior to this podcast, you were mentioning something about cutting things to restore power. And I'd like you, because I'm also aware we probably would need to wrap it up soon. I know we could talk about this for a lot longer, but that's something that sounded very exciting.
Helpful.
Yeah, very interesting to me, because I think, again, that's not something that's taught to,
Yes.
how you can energetically carry stuff that's not yours. And I mean, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. I'd like to hear tell people how they can do that. Yeah,
that's it. So if we're all energetic beings, and along with trees and everything really has an energetic frequency, and our mind is also kind of part of this energetic creation tool, if you like, our conscious mind. Sometimes if we're feeling particularly kind of in a victim place or victimized by a certain experience or person, or we're talking about kind of feeling empowered, what we might have been doing without realizing it is creating these energetic cords between us and the situation at the level of vibration that we perceive it to be, or between us and the other person or people in the situation. And we get kind of stuck in these loops, like in our mind, and then also our body's going to be reacting to that, either feeling very agitated or completely collapsed. Energetically, there are these cords that go out to the situation, which it kind of like exists energetically in our consciousness, and is also being held by other people in their consciousness. So events can hold an energetic signature or frequency, and have an energy body, if you like. And so the practice, and we could do it together now if you want to, the practice would be because what we want to do is cut the cords at the vibration that they're currently being held, in anxiety, in despair, in hopelessness. And then what we want to do is we want to reclaim all of our energy for ourselves, reinvest it back into the present moment. It could be something that happened in the past or in the future. We want to bring it back into the present, into our energy body now, into the presence of this moment and our body. And then we want to, so that's the first step. And then if we want to kind of pull in as much energy that we can from source, from the part of self that is always unconditionally loving and is connected to our higher consciousness and our wisdom. We want to pull in as much energy that we can from that, and kind of and hold that in our body, and then send love to the person or situation from a kind of non-attached place. and kind of ask that the highest outcome come. We might not know what that is.
Yeah.
Like our conscious mind maybe has no clue what that could be, you know. And I've seen it with birth clients a lot. I would do this practice with them around cutting cords of attachment around expectations around the birth. They could be positive or negative, you know, but actually what does your soul, what does this baby soul really want from this birth experience? How can we let go of what our expectation around that and really be open to what is the highest, most, you know, beneficial experience for the mom, the birthing person, the baby, the family. That's a slightly tangent example, but it's the same principle, right? It's the same principle because and that practice for me, game changer. Like I do it regularly with, especially with the people I love and I'm closest to, because they're the ones I'm often the most frequently creating these little cords of attachment, which are sort of sets our relationship into like stuck patterns.
Yeah.
My child, my partner, my ex-partner, you know, often I'm doing that a lot with them. Or if I'm going through a really big thing, maybe daily practice of cutting. So we use an arm gesture.
Yeah.
So it's a somatically felt experience as well as this using the breath and using the intention and the visualization. And it feels really good. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah. Yes, I like the explanation you give because it demystifies that, you know, often when we're talking about energetics and spiritual stuff, people think like you need to be having special skills to do it, you know, like, you know, I run drum circles. I ran one last night. And when I teach people how to cleanse each other energetically before we start the circle, I said, you don't need to have, you know, special powers. Everybody can do this. It's about intention. You know, yesterday we cleansed each other using sound because there were people in the space that were uncomfortable with smoke. So teach people how to use rattles around people's energy. Always remind people that we're all magical. We all have that.
Yeah.
Because again, when you talk about cord cutting, people go, oh, it's a special skill that I don't have and I don't know how to do that. And it takes a special person with special training. And, you know, what you describe here is utterly simple. Is intention is everything. And you just visualize. And I like the fact you said you add a somatic element to it.
Yes, we have a little arm movement. And you don't even have to be able to visualize, because I know some people don't
can't. No, that's very true.
On the inside of their mind, and
I often say visualize, feel, or intent that blah 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 is happening.
This is happening.
If you tell people visualize and they're not the visualizing kind, it's just going to generate a lot of frustration.
Yes, yeah, exactly. But I think even when people are not visualizing, then it's still working. They still experience a benefit, and I think it's a great tool that I use a lot for myself and with clients too.
Lovely. I think we're probably going to need to wrap this up, Aimee. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and your experience today. I've just wanted to finish to say, where can people find you if they'd like to find out more about your work and this particular practice?
Yes, so I'm on Instagram at Aimee Hamblyn. I think it's Aimee_Hamblyn_healing.
I will put a link under this podcast.
Yes, and I work with clients, so work one-to-one. I have different like for parents, I have a 6-month program one-to-one working with parents. I work remotely with pregnant people as well. And I also offer kind of mentoring. So like, I guess it's more of an ongoing container,
Mhm.
annual container with less frequent sessions, but for people who are on a spiritual path, um, and they maybe have already some practices, but they want to connect in. For that's another sacred mentoring practice that I have, and also a container for birth workers specifically over the winter. Well, that will start again in November. So these are the ways you can work with me at the moment.
Lovely. Thank you again, Aimee.
Thank you, Sophie. So good to chat.